On June 28, 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand marked the spark that would ignite World War I, often referred to at the time as the Great War or the war to end all wars. While most discussions of the war begin with this event, it's important to look beyond the assassination to understand the broader causes and consequences of the conflict.
It wasn't until a full month later, on July 28th, that war was officially declared. By July 28, 2014, the world marked the centenary of the war's outbreak. Over the course of 4 years, the Great War reshaped the globe in profound ways.
4 empires, including the Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, German, and Russian, collapsed. At the same time, new nations emerged, and various powerful movements such as fascism, internationalism, and national self-determination began to take root and redefine politics. From a technological perspective, the war accelerated global advancement. Although cars and planes existed before 1914, by the end of the war in 1918, the world had witnessed the development of tanks, diesel engines, combat aircraft, and large planes that could soon be adapted for civilian travel. The human cost of the war was staggering. Estimates suggest around 40 million military and civilian casualties, including nearly 10 million soldiers killed, at a time when the world's population was only about a quarter of what it is today. But what drove the world to war in the first place? The idea of a European conflict wasn't new. In the early 20th century, such a war was sometimes spoken of in romanticized terms, especially by military leaders who had never experienced real combat.
More often, though, it was seen as inevitable, a result of rising nationalism, revolutionary agitation, strikes, and political unrest that destabilized much of Europe.
To understand the war's origins, it's helpful to consider what a German Europe might have looked like in 1914. At the time, this was more than a fantasy. Germany, unified under Bismarck after defeating France in 1871, had become Europe's dominant power. Berlin had surpassed London as the continent's intellectual and industrial hub.
Leading figures from across Europe, British statesmen, Russian revolutionaries, and others studied in Germany. German inventions and names such as Hertz, Röntgen, Diesel, and Mach had become widely known. There were genuine discussions about a German-led European alliance or Commonwealth, one that could stand up to British and American influence, fueled by resources from France, Scandinavia, and possibly colonial holdings in the Middle East or Africa.
However, Germany couldn't achieve this vision alone. It needed the support of its long-standing ally to the south, Austria-Hungary.
Austria-Hungary, however, was in trouble. Internally, the empire was plagued by ethnic tensions, financial mismanagement, and an outdated leadership. Emperor Franz Joseph, who had ruled since 1848, was 84 years old and clung to policies that no longer matched the modern world. The empire was composed of multiple ethnic groups, each with its own version of the national anthem, and many were pushing for independence.
One key decision that worsened Austria's situation came in 1908, when it formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, lands that were still officially under Ottoman rule. This angered not only the Ottoman Empire but also neighboring Serbia, which saw itself as the defender of Slavic unity in the Balkans. Anti-Austrian sentiment grew rapidly among the Slavic peoples.
Instead of offering meaningful reforms or autonomy to these groups, Austria did little.
For years, the empire had relied on buying loyalty from its minority populations, an unsustainable practice that left little funding for its oversized and under-equipped army.
It eventually became paralyzed, hoping no major crisis would occur. But that hope would soon prove tragically misplaced.
The wider European situation was similarly complex. For decades, no major continental war had occurred, largely due to a shifting web of alliances and diplomatic balancing acts. Germany and Austria-Hungary were part of the Triple Alliance, along with Italy, though few expected Italy to actually be reliable in a war.
Meanwhile, France, still resentful after its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, had grown closer to both Russia and Britain. Together, these three powers formed the Triple Entente by 1907.
While Russia supported Slavic nations like Serbia, Germany had begun to grow closer to the Ottoman Empire, heightening tensions. Russian exports, particularly wheat, depended on the Dardanelles, which were now increasingly under German influence via the Ottomans, a nightmare scenario for Russian planners.
The relationship between Germany and Britain was unique. There was mutual admiration between the two nations in many respects, especially culturally and industrially.
But trouble began when Kaiser Wilhelm II, despite public and political opposition, decided to challenge Britain directly by building a massive navy. Historian Norman Stone once remarked that Germany's decision to construct a fleet designed to rival Britain's was the greatest mistake of the 20th century.
But trouble began when Kaiser Wilhelm II, despite public and political opposition, decided to challenge Britain directly by building a massive navy. Historian Norman Stone once remarked that Germany's decision to construct a fleet designed to rival Britain's was the greatest mistake of the 20th century.
But trouble began when Kaiser Wilhelm II, despite public and political opposition, decided to challenge Britain directly by building a massive navy. Historian Norman Stone once remarked that Germany's decision to construct a fleet designed to rival Britain's was the greatest mistake of the 20th century.
Winston Churchill, then Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, proposed that both nations pause their naval arms race. Britain, as a global empire, required a dominant navy for survival, but Germany, without overseas territories, was seen as building one out of prestige and ambition. The German Navy absorbed a third of the defense budget, making it impossible for Germany to properly prepare for a two-front war against France and Russia. Ironically, despite all the investment, Germany's battleships saw little action during the war. They mostly sat idle until their crews eventually mutinied.
As tensions rose, Britain responded by vastly expanding its own fleet and tightening its alliances with France and Russia. Though the seeds of global conflict had been sown long before 1914, the situation had now reached a dangerous boiling point.
Even as the Austro-Hungarian Empire expanded, internal divisions, especially among its Slavic populations, were pulling it apart. In 1908, Emperor Franz Joseph formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. This move sparked a surge of anti-Austrian sentiment, particularly in Serbia, which lost its hopes of gaining access to an Adriatic port as Austria claimed around 375 miles of Slavic territory. This annexation also gave Austria a strategic advantage for potential military action against Serbia.
At the time, Slavic peoples were scattered across Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. Many dreamed of uniting under a single pan-Slavic nation. Except for Austria, the other Slavic countries had spent centuries under Ottoman rule, often suffering brutal oppression, and had only recently started to shape their own destinies. So when Austria took control of more Slavic land, it reignited old resentments.
Now let's look at Serbia in the early 1900s. Serbia, a newly independent and fiercely nationalistic country, had broken free from the Ottoman Empire in 1878. Its national motto, "Where a Serb lives, there is Serbia," alarmed other European powers. For Serbia to unify the southern Slavs, it would need to dismantle Austria-Hungary, a goal that would almost certainly mean war.
Despite its ambitions, Serbia was a small nation of fewer than 5 million people. And while seeking allies, it alienated many by violently suppressing its own minorities, particularly Muslims, mirroring the oppression Serbs themselves faced under Austrian rule. So Serbia didn't earn much sympathy from the broader European community. To most Europeans, the Balkans were a distant, turbulent region where violence and political upheaval were just part of the landscape. In fact, in 1903, a violent regime change occurred in Serbia. King Alexander and Queen Draga were assassinated in their private quarters by a group of army officers. Their bodies were mutilated. One of the key conspirators, Dragutin Dmitrievich, also known as Apis, survived and became a national hero. He went on to help found and lead the Black Hand, a secret nationalist group. With a name like the Black Hand, you can probably guess they weren't organizing food drives or public gardens. By the time World War I began, the Black Hand had thousands of members, including military officers and government insiders. Their activities were what you'd expect from a radical nationalist group, plotting assassinations, training guerrilla fighters, and pushing for pan-Slavic unity. Their movement gained traction during the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913. But before we get into that, we need to touch on the Moroccan crises. There were two of these, one in 1905 and one in 1911. And while you can look up the details, the basic idea is that Germany, led by the Kaiser, tried to break the alliance between Britain and France, hoping instead to align with Britain. But it backfired. Britain and France only grew closer while Germany became more isolated. As a result, France gained control of Morocco, while Britain remained entrenched in Egypt. Seeing these colonial power plays, Italy decided it wanted a piece of the crumbling Ottoman Empire. Confident that the major powers wouldn't intervene, especially after the Moroccan debacle, Italy invaded the Ottomans and quickly seized Libya in under a month. This emboldened the Balkan states. Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, and Bulgaria, with support from Russia, formed the Balkan League and launched the First Balkan War, successfully driving the Ottomans out of the Balkans for the first time in 500 years. But the victory was short-lived. Within a month, Bulgaria, unhappy with how the spoils were divided, turned on its former allies, launching the Second Balkan War. During that war, Serbia took control of Albania and gained a much-desired seaport. But Austria quickly issued an ultimatum: withdraw from Albania within 8 days. Serbia complied. The fallout from the Balkan Wars was chaotic, but several things stood out. Serbia had nearly doubled in size and gained confidence. In early 1914, most Serbs would have felt that war had worked in their favor. But that confidence came at a steep cost. Between 1912 and 1918, 1 in 6 Serbians, men, women, and children, would die violently. The disintegration of the Balkan League left Russia with only Serbia as an ally in the region. After taking a strong pro-Serbian stance during the wars, Russia had little choice but to back Serbia unconditionally in 1914. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary and Germany were deeply concerned by Serbia's rise. Many German-speaking Europeans saw Serbia as a puppet of Russia. Austria wanted to halt both Serbian expansion and Slavic nationalism. At the same time, after being humiliated in its war with Japan in 1905 and unable to stop Austria's annexation of Bosnia in 1908, Russia was eager to reassert itself and avoid further international embarrassment.
And that's where things stood in June 1914. Europe divided into rival alliances, Balkan tensions boiling, and a secret terrorist network using political murder to achieve its aims. Then, Archduke Franz Ferdinand arrived in Sarajevo.
Let's talk briefly about Franz Ferdinand himself. There are plenty of in-depth biographies out there, but here's a quick overview. Born in 1863, Franz Ferdinand was one of Austria's many archdukes, back before the empire was officially called Austria-Hungary. He unexpectedly inherited enormous wealth at a young age when a cousin passed away.
Then, in 1889, the suicide of another cousin, Crown Prince Rudolf, dramatically altered his path. Franz Ferdinand's father was suddenly heir to the throne, but chose to renounce the title, putting Franz Ferdinand next in line to lead the empire. He remained the heir until his death, with Emperor Franz Joseph still on the throne at the age of 84, while Franz Ferdinand was 50.
Most people disliked him, except for his wife, Duchess Sophia. Sophia came from Bohemian nobility but lacked royal blood, so the imperial family forbade her or their children from inheriting the throne. Because of this, they were looked down upon by the Austrian elite, and the couple was often treated with open disdain, despite his royal status. One thing almost every account of him includes is his obsession with hunting. He reportedly killed over 250,000 animals in his lifetime. An odd detail, but one that shows up everywhere.
What really matters, though, were his political beliefs. He was deeply conservative and, to put it kindly, not very progressive. He had open disdain for Hungarians, considered Slavic peoples inferior, and is even known to have called Serbs pigs.
A devout Catholic, he also harbored strong anti-Semitic and anti-Jesuit views, common in the climate of the time. Despite all this, he was said to deeply love his wife and was committed to preserving the empire, something that plays a key role later.
Now let's turn to his killer, Gavrilo Princip. Princip belonged to a radical nationalist group called the Young Bosnians, one of several secret movements in the Balkans pushing for violent change. He and his fellow conspirators began planning the assassination after learning of Franz Ferdinand's upcoming visit to Bosnia in March 1914.
In May, Princip and two others traveled to Belgrade, Serbia, where they received weapons, 4 pistols and 6 bombs from the Black Hand, another underground nationalist organization. Princip even practiced shooting in a public park. Yes, back then, apparently that was a thing. In fact, on the day his journey began, his car broke down, and he jokingly said, "Our journey begins with a good omen. Our car catches fire, and down there they'll be throwing bombs at us." Interestingly, the Archduke and Sophia decided to arrive in Sarajevo earlier than expected, on a whim, and spent a pleasant evening exploring the city. That same night, Sophia met a Bosnian parliamentarian who had urged the couple to cancel their trip for safety reasons. When she told him how welcomed they'd felt, even by the local Serbs, he responded chillingly, "Your Highness, I hope tomorrow evening you will still be able to say the same."
The following day, coincidentally their 14th wedding anniversary, the couple joined a motorcade leaving the Sarajevo train station. 7 members of the Young Bosnians were positioned around the city's bridges. One of them threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off and exploded nearby, injuring 2 members of his staff. After continuing on to the town hall and hearing the scheduled speeches, Franz Ferdinand decided to change the plan and visit the wounded men in the hospital. However, confusion about the new route led to a critical mistake. As the driver tried to correct the path and reverse near the Apple K without a working reverse gear, he unknowingly stopped the car right next to Gavrilo Princip, who happened to be standing there.
What's remarkable is how chaotic and uncoordinated the whole plot was. It almost seemed destined to fail. Had the Austrians taken even minimal security measures, it might never have happened. While some argue the Black Hand played a greater role, the planning was, frankly, amateurish.
Still, the aftermath was immediate and intense. News of the assassination spread rapidly across Europe. In Bosnia alone, over 5,000 Serbs were arrested within a month, and many were later executed after war began. Because he was 27 days too young to receive the death penalty under Austrian law, Princip was imprisoned instead.
While a few European leaders grasped the potentially devastating political consequences, most dismissed the assassination as just another act of violence from the unstable Balkans. Franz Ferdinand was not widely mourned, even in Vienna, where his funeral lasted just 15 minutes.
And yet, here's the great irony. Princip and the nationalist groups behind him killed the one man who may have been able to stop the war they feared most. Despite his offensive views, Franz Ferdinand was firmly opposed to going to war with Russia and had repeatedly said he'd do everything possible to prevent it. Furthermore, unlike much of the ruling elite, he supported the idea of transforming the dual monarchy into a three-part empire: Austria, Hungary, and a Slavic federation, something that could have actually empowered the very people who hated him.
So, when Franz Ferdinand was killed by a Serbian nationalist, it triggered exactly what he had wanted to avoid. Austria invaded Serbia, war with Russia followed, and eventually, a full-blown world war erupted.